3rd December 1945, 08:45 hours. Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough, Hampshire. Lieutenant Commander Eric Melrose Brown, 26, Royal Navy test pilot, walks the flight line inspecting what should not exist. Before him stand 37 captured German aircraft, fighters, bombers, jets, rocket planes, Messerschmitt, Mi-262 twin jets, Winkle, He-162, Volksjäger, and there, cordoned off with particular caution, a Messerschmitt. Mi-163 Komet rocket interceptor. Today the British public will see them, thousands of tickets issued, a flying display planned. Brown will personally demonstrate several types, including the Mi-163, the aircraft that killed more German pilots in training than it ever destroyed Allied bombers. Subscribe to Britain in Battle if you believe these stories of machines, men, and the aftermath of war deserve to be told with precision and preserved with respect. This was the day the British proved they had not merely defeated Germany's air force, they had captured, understood, and were prepared to demonstrate its most advanced technology. 6 months earlier, these aircraft hadn't existed in British possession. They sat on German airfields, in factories, scattered across occupied Europe. Now they bore RAF roundels and Air Ministry serial numbers. They represented the largest technical intelligence windfall in aviation history. Germany surrendered on the 8th of May 1945, but its aircraft didn't. They sat waiting, like a treasure trove and a threat at the same time. This is what the British did with them. This is the story of assessment, preservation, and systematic elimination, told from the institution that made those decisions. The capitulation was immediate and absolute. Under the terms of the German Instrument of Surrender signed 8th May 1945, all Luftwaffe aircraft were grounded with immediate effect. German personnel were forbidden from operating, maintaining, or approaching military aircraft without explicit Allied authorization. The scale confronting British occupation forces was staggering. In the British zone of occupation, northwest Germany, including Schleswig-Holstein, Lower Saxony, and North Rhine-Westphalia, an estimated 2,100 German military aircraft sat abandoned on airfields. Air Marshal Sir John Slessor, commanding RAF forces in Germany, established immediate priorities. First, secure all jet and rocket aircraft. Second, preserve examples of unknown or advanced types. Third, catalogue everything. Fourth, prepare for systematic disposal. The RAF formed Number 2, Group Under Air, Vice Marshal Basil Embry to handle German aircraft in the British zone. They divided the task geographically. Northern airfields, Schleswig, Flensburg, Husum, fell to British forces advancing from Denmark. Central German airfields, Fassberg, Celle, Wunstorf, were secured by units moving eastward. In each case, armed guards were posted immediately. What they found astonished them. At Grove Airfield, Denmark, British-occupied zone, intact Arado R-234 jet bombers sat fueled and operational. At Lech, Focke-Wulf Tar 152 high-altitude fighters, barely known to Allied intelligence, stood in pristine condition. At Husum, 17 Heinkel, He-162 jets, factory fresh, awaited collection. Group Captain Douglas Bader, commanding the Tangmere Wing, flew into northern Germany on the 10th of May. He later wrote, "We found German airfields that looked like motor shows. Aircraft parked in rows, propellers removed, the Germans' gesture of surrender, but otherwise intact. One felt rather like a child in a sweet shop." The Air Ministry in London issued Air Staff Instruction AS.20/1945 on 15th May. All German aircraft of intelligence value were to be preserved pending technical evaluation. Priority examples would be shipped to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, but the order raised immediate questions. What constituted intelligence value? Who decided? How many could Britain transport and maintain? The answers would determine which aircraft survived and which faced destruction. Sir Roy Fedden, former managing director of Bristol Aircraft and one of Britain's leading aero-engine designers, received his orders on the 18th of May 1945. He would lead a Ministry of Aircraft production mission into Germany to assess the Luftwaffe's technical capabilities. The directive was explicit. determine what Germany knew that Britain didn't. The Fedden mission, 26 specialists including engineers, metallurgists and aerodynamicists, entered Germany on the 22nd of May. They would spend 3 months visiting research facilities, interrogating engineers and evaluating captured technology. Fedden's preliminary findings, submitted to the Air Ministry in August 1945, were sobering. In several key areas, swept-wing aerodynamics, axial flow jet engines, rocket propulsion, German research had progressed significantly beyond British work. The report stated, "We have captured approximately 3 years of development in specific fields. The question is whether we possess the industrial capacity and strategic will to exploit it." Parallel to Fedden's industrial assessment, the RAF conducted operational evaluation. This task fell to Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown and the newly formed enemy aircraft flight at Farnborough. Brown was uniquely qualified. A fluent German speaker, he'd flown Seafires in combat, survived the sinking of HMS Audacity in 1941, and possessed exceptional test flying skills. More critically, he was willing to fly aircraft that had killed their German pilots during development. Between June and November 1945, Brown flew 53 different German types. Each flight was meticulously documented, handling characteristics, performance figures, structural weaknesses. His reports went directly to the Air Ministry and informed Britain's assessment of which aircraft warranted preservation. The Me-163 Komet presented particular challenges. Brown flew it at Farnborough on the 3rd of December 1945, the only Allied pilot to fly the rocket plane under power. His assessment was clinical: endurance, 7 minutes powered flight, landing speed excessive at 140 miles per hour. Fuel volatility represents catastrophic explosion risk. Operationally, the aircraft demanded more courage than the average fighter pilot possessed. Several German pilots died simply attempting to land it. His conclusions shaped British policy. The Me-163 was technically fascinating but operationally useless. Britain would preserve one example for study. The rest could be destroyed. Similar evaluations occurred across all captured types. The Me-262 jet fighter, genuinely formidable but plagued by engine reliability issues. The He-162 rushed into production with glued wooden components, structurally questionable. The Arado R-234 jet bomber, excellent reconnaissance platform, limited combat value. Each assessment answered the central question: did this aircraft offer Britain knowledge worth preserving, or could it be eliminated? By September 1945, the Air Ministry had compiled its preservation list. Approximately 100 aircraft would be retained for technical study. The remainder, over 2,000 aircraft in the British zone, were condemned for disposal. The British public would see the preserved examples at Farnborough in November. What they wouldn't see were the thousands already marked for destruction. In July 1945, the RAF established 10 air disarmament wings to dismantle the Luftwaffe's remaining infrastructure. Nearly 3,000 RAF personnel deployed to Germany specifically for this task. Their mandate was absolute. Germany would retain no military aviation capability. Allied Control Council Directive No. 23, issued 17th May, had grounded all German aircraft. Directive No. 31, issued 10th July, ordered their destruction. The timeline was uncompromising. Disposal operations would be completed by 31st December 1947. The scale was industrial. At Schleswig-Holstein's coastal airfields, British disposal teams processed hundreds of aircraft through systematic destruction procedures. Engines removed first. These had potential civil use or scrap value. Instruments extracted, gauges, radios, gun sights sent to RAF technical intelligence. Then structural disassembly. Wing Commander Harold Bird Wilson, commanding one disposal unit, described the process in a 1946 operations report. "We began by removing anything that could fly, fight, or see. Then we cut the wing spars. You can't reconstruct an aircraft with severed spars. Then we crushed or burned what remained. Some aircraft were bulldozed, others were burned in controlled pyres. The smell of aviation fuel, rubber, and wood smoke hung over German airfields for months. A significant number were barged out to sea and scuttled. Underwater archaeology surveys conducted in the 1990s discovered extraordinary grave sites, fields of submerged German fighters resting on Baltic seabeds, still identifiable by type. The economics reinforced the destruction. Post-war Britain was desperate for raw materials. German military aircraft contained thousands of tons of aluminium, steel, copper and rubber. Scrapping them provided employment for German labour and feedstock for reconstruction. British disposal teams established processing centres that operated like factories. Quotas, efficiency metrics, material recovery targets. A single Junkers Ju-88 bomber yielded approximately 1.2 tons of aluminium alloy. Multiply that across thousands of aircraft and the economic incentive became clear. But disposal wasn't merely economic, it was strategic demilitarization. The Air Ministry understood that preserved aircraft could be reactivated, destroyed aircraft could not. Exceptions existed but required Air Ministry authorization. The Junkers Ju-52 tri-motor transport presented a special case. Several dozen had operated in civilian service before the war. Could they return to commercial operation under Allied supervision? After months of debate, limited operation was permitted, but only for aircraft with documented pre-war civilian service, and only after complete demilitarization, removal of military fittings, installation of civilian instruments, ongoing Allied inspection. By 1948, perhaps 20 Ju-52s remained in controlled civilian use in Germany. This represented a survival rate of less than 0.5% from the approximately 4,800 Ju-52s produced during the war. The RAF air disarmament wings completed their mission by December 1947. Thousands of aircraft had been erased from existence. What survived were the examples the Air Ministry had deliberately preserved, and those few that served specific post-war purposes. The November 1945 exhibition at Farnborough represented more than public spectacle. It demonstrated Britain's technical mastery over captured German aviation. The aircraft on display, 37 types ranging from obsolete trainers to cutting-edge jets, bore RAF serial numbers and new designations. The Messerschmitt Me 262 became Air Ministry designations AM-50 through AM-65. The Heinkel He 162S received serial numbers VH509 through VH515. The Arado R-234 bombers AM-21 through AM-34. Each aircraft was catalogued, photographed, and subjected to rigorous ground and flight testing. Brown's flight demonstrations at Farnborough shocked spectators. He performed aerobatics in the He 162, a jet fighter the Germans had barely dared fly straight and level. He explained later, "The British public needed to see that we understood these aircraft completely, that we weren't intimidated by them, that German technology, while advanced in areas, was not insurmountable. The technical intelligence windfall was genuine. German swept-wing research conducted at facilities like Falkenrode influenced British jet design for years. The Armstrong-Whitworth AW-52 flying wing, the de Havilland DH-108 research aircraft, both incorporated lessons learned from captured German documents. German axial flow jet engine technology, particularly the BMW 003 and Junkers Jumo 004, informed British engine development. Rolls-Royce and Bristol studied captured engines extensively, though British centrifugal flow designs like the Rolls-Royce Nene ultimately proved more practical. But Britain's assessment was clear-eyed. German jets had been operationally premature. They consumed fuel at staggering rates. Their engines required replacement after 10 hours of operation. They were maintenance nightmares. Brown's evaluation of the Me 262 was representative. Exceptional speed advantage, reasonable handling, appalling reliability. No British squadron could maintain operational readiness with these engines. The Air Ministry concluded that Britain had gained knowledge, not operational capability. The jets were fascinating. They were also, by British standards, unusable. What Britain truly valued was understanding, why German designs succeeded where they did, and more importantly, why they failed where they did. The preserved aircraft provided that understanding. Then they were archived. Tell me in the comments, which nation do you believe gained the most from capturing German aviation technology, America, Britain, or the Soviet Union? By 1950, most of the preserved German aircraft had been withdrawn from active testing. Some went to museums, the RAF Museum, the Imperial War Museum, the Science Museum. Others were scrapped after their intelligence value expired. A handful remained in storage. The Americans had taken more aircraft, over 300 shipped to the United States. The Soviets had seized entire factories. But Britain had captured knowledge systematically, evaluated it professionally, and integrated useful elements into British aviation development. What the British didn't do was romanticize German technology. It was studied, understood, and where appropriate, dismissed. Outside British control, a handful of German aircraft found second lives, brief, unglamorous, and ultimately futile. Czechoslovakia assembled the Avia S-199 from captured Bf-109 components. Using junkers, Jumo Tu-11 bomber engines instead of the proper Daimler-Benz fighters' engines, the aircraft was viciously difficult to fly. Czech pilots called it mezek, mule. Israel purchased 25 in 1948, desperate for any fighters during the War of Independence. They were grounded by 1949. Spain continued licensed production of the Bf-109 as the Hispano Aviación HA-111-2 Buchon, eventually fitting them with Rolls-Royce Merlin engines purchased from Britain. They remained in service until 1965, 20 years after the Luftwaffe ceased to exist. They were not successful aircraft, they were expedient ones. If the scale of this erasure gives you pause about what disappears from history, mark it with a like, not for approval, for recognition. Norway operated captured German trainers briefly until spares ran out. France used captured FW-190s for training until 1947. Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria all evaluated captured types, found them unserviceable, and scrapped them within months. By 1950, operational German aircraft had essentially vanished from European skies. What remained were museum pieces and the occasional recovered wreck. Aviation archaeology became a modest industry decades later. Alpine crash sites yielded surprisingly intact airframes. Eastern Front battlefields produced aircraft excavated from swamps. Scandinavian lakes gave up floatplane fighters preserved in cold, oxygen-poor water. Museum restorers faced a fundamental challenge. A complete German aircraft usually combined components from 6 different airframes. Engines were remanufactured, instruments were replicas, paint schemes were educated guesses. Today, perhaps 70 Luftwaffe aircraft remain in genuinely original condition worldwide. The RAF Museum at Hendon holds 14, including examples tested by Brown at Farnborough. Surviving Me-262s number fewer than 10 from approximately 1,400 built. A handful fly as restored or replicated examples. Every public flight represents thousands of hours of engineering work. These are not original aircraft in any meaningful sense. They are tributes built from fragments. What survived wasn't the Luftwaffe, it was the knowledge the Allies, and particularly Britain, systematically extracted and preserved. Eric Brown continued test flying after the war, eventually becoming Britain's chief naval test pilot. He flew 487 different aircraft types over his career, more than anyone in history. He made 2,407 aircraft carrier landings, another world record. He survived numerous crashes and near misses. He lived to 97, dying in 2016. In interviews late in life, Brown reflected on the captured German aircraft with characteristic precision. They represented extraordinary engineering under impossible conditions, but engineering alone doesn't win wars. The Germans built jets when they needed bombers. They built rockets when they needed fuel. They pursued technical excellence while their production collapsed. Britain studied what they'd achieved and applied it where it mattered, which was not in romantic wonder weapons, but in practical aviation development. His assessment was quintessentially British, measured, analytical, unsentimental. The aircraft he'd risked his life to evaluate had taught Britain what it needed to know. Then they were catalogued, archived, or destroyed. The knowledge endured, the machines did not. Between May 1945 and December 1947, the RAF systematically processed thousands of German aircraft. The majority were destroyed under Allied Control Council directives. A carefully selected minority were preserved for technical evaluation. An even smaller number reached museums. The British approach was methodical: assess, test, document, preserve what offers knowledge, destroy what threatens security. This was not sentiment, it was policy. What happened to the Luftwaffe planes after World War II? From the British perspective, they were captured, understood, exploited for intelligence value, and then, in overwhelming majority, eliminated. The useful knowledge was extracted, the physical hardware was erased, the machines vanished, the lessons endured, and the British aviation industry, informed by what it had learned from German research, moved forward. The Germans built the aircraft, the British wrote the postscript. Press the like button if this account expanded your understanding of what happened after the surrender. Leave one word in the comments describing what these abandoned aircraft represented: treasure, threat, or tragedy. And subscribe to Britain in Battle, because when we stop documenting these aftermaths with precision, we lose accountability to the historical record. Thank you for watching Britain in Battle.